Hello, every pony. I am Anonymous, as you may have guessed. Now, I haven't spoken to you before as myself. Like it? Hate it? Tell me in the comments. I can always post these as a separate thing if people have a problem with it. I just wanted to apologize to all of you for how long it's taken to get Chapter 3 out. To be honest, perfectionist that I am, I would love to work on it for another week, but I'm starting to record Chapter 4 today, and I figured you guys would just want to hear it as it is. Editing this chapter actually took a lot longer than previous chapters, not because it's actually a longer chapter, but because I'm trying to do things which are a bit more complicated with the sound effects and the music. I'm not sure if I went a bit overboard putting music into this chapter. It may be a little bit distracting, so I would love if you could give me some feedback and tell me what you think. Just to clear up a few things in the comments, I did not write this story. This story was written by Nine, as you can probably tell by the opening credits. There's a link to his Equestria Daily post in the description. Second thing, while this is not actually a live reading, it is pretty close. I obviously edit out any mistakes I make, but apart from that, I just keep speaking, and I keep making up character voices on the fly. In this chapter, I really couldn't think of how Derpy should sound, so that's not great. I may change her voice later, but I will try to be as consistent as possible with the other characters. Just wanted to give a shout out to Voz de Suños, who gave me an awesome shout out in his podcast. I'm sure that gave me a few viewers. If you don't know who that is, I'll put a link in my description. You should check him out. His stuff is awesome. So, without further ado, here is Death Note Equestria, Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Exclusion. Shinigami do not do, in principle, anything which will help or prevent the deaths in the Death Note. Twilight? Twilight! Somehow Spike had been the first to wake that morning, now beating on Twilight's door excitedly. Come on, Twilight! Big day ahead of us! Twilight groaned and looked around for her clock. It was barely after dawn, and she felt like she hadn't slept all night. At least, not after... She shuddered at the memory. Even knowing that the god of death was on her side, she still felt a little creeped out thinking about him. Those teeth. She shook herself awake and rolled out of bed, reaching for a comb for her disheveled mane. Coming, Spike! As soon as she'd opened the door, Spike was literally bounding around her, looking as excited as Pinkie Pie preparing for a party. Guess what, Twilight? You'll never believe who's in town! Actually, Spike, I probably will. What's all this fuss about? Colgate's back! Twilight stared blankly. You know, blue unicorn, hourglass cutie mark, hair that looks like toothpaste? You must have seen her around. That does sound like some pony I know, Twilight mused. What's so special about her? That's just it. She's come to put together a police force. She says they're going to help catch Kira. Now that was interesting. Twilight made her way downstairs, dodging away from the overexcited dragon. How exactly does she plan to do that? I don't think the neighborhood watch is going to help with anything on that scale. That's the best part. We've got someone else on our side. Elle! Spike put his hands up to his cheeks and gave an embarrassing fanboyish squeal. Elle? Twilight laughed. I think somebody's been reading too many detective novels, if they believe that. Elle's not real, Spike. Don't get your hopes up. Elle is so real! The pair reached the library's kitchen. Over the counter, Buick froze, a handful of candied fruits halfway held up to his lips. He shoved them in his mouth before Spike noticed, and grinned sheepishly. Twilight tried to ignore him, and started to prepare her own breakfast, while the little dragons grabbed some gems and sat down. Colgate said she'd spoken to Elle herself. He's leading the investigation. Spike, that's not true. Twilight sat opposite him with a bowl of corn chips. The real Elle, if he ever existed, lived over 1,200 years ago. He was supposed to have been this legendary detective, so good ponies have never stopped writing about him. Even if he was real, there's no way he could still be alive today. Nuh-uh, Spike insisted. El was so good at solving cases that the princesses gave him eternal life. He's been waiting for over 1,000 years just for a crime to come along so big only he could solve it, and now he's back! Right. Twilight rolled her eyes. Look, Spike, I'm telling you, whoever this El character is, he's not some pony of legend. He's just some egocentric, overpaid detective who thinks he's too good to push papers like the rest of them. Twilight, you of all ponies. Spike hiccuped and hastily shoved a claw in his mouth. You okay, Spike? Fine, he gulped loudly and tried to steady himself. Just, hungry, that's all. He popped a cracked ruby in his mouth and tried to force a smile, which twisted into a grimace. So when did you... Oops. In a belch of green flame, a scroll materialized over the table, drifting down into Spike's waiting hands. Under Twilight's gaze, he turned pale. No small feat for a creature with scales. So, he shuffled in his seat, trying unsuccessfully to hide the scroll behind his back. How about that weather, huh? Twilight tried to keep her voice even. Spike, is that letter for me? No, I mean, He quickly rolled the scroll open and scanned the first few lines. Oh, look at that! It's not for you, Twilight. How about that? Now that I think of it, you don't even read the paper. How did you find out about Colgate before I did? The uncomfortable shuffling got worse. Twilight put on her most stern expression and stared back at the little dragon. Spike, have you been delivering letters to some pony behind my back? Spike forced out a final chuckle, but he felt his defenses crumbling beneath his surrogate mother's gaze. His head fell. I had to, Twilight. I'm the only dragon anywhere near Ponyville. It's my royal duty. And I wanted to tell you, but the first letter I said I couldn't tell anyone, not even you. I'm sorry, Twilight. The little dragon tried to sink even further into his seat, but to his surprise, found a gentle hoof stroking the top of his head. He looked up to find Twilight standing over him, smiling. It's okay, Spike. If the princess asked you not to tell me, it's not your fault. I was just worried you'd gotten into some trouble and felt you had to hide it from me. You're not in any trouble, are you? Probably not. I mean, no. Then there's nothing to worry about. So, now that the cat's out of the bag, who's that letter for? Spike thought for a moment before answering. It would be breaking the princess's orders, but if he couldn't trust Twilight, who could he trust? Colgate. Great! That's settled then. The purple filly levitated Spike onto her back and started for the door. Let's deliver it right now. But what about breakfast? What's more important, Spike? Breakfast or royal duty? We can eat later. And if this Colgate is putting together a team to catch me, I want to be on it as soon as possible. I want to know what she knows. Hey, are we going out? While Twilight grabbed her saddlebags, Buick floated into the kitchen and hovered alongside her. The unlikely trio started out the door. Despite Twilight's childings, Spike hadn't stopped talking about Elle all the way to the police station. He's got 14 different cutie marks, and he can switch them out whenever he wants, and his eyes glow whenever some pony tries to lie to him. One time, this gangster told him a lie that was so big, Elle's lies lit up, and wham! Blinded him. And he could breathe fire, too. Twilight looked back. And what does that have to do with solving crimes? I don't know, but it's really cool. Spike continued to ramble, while Twilight kept her eyes fixed in front of her. A black shape hovered just behind her, casting a large shadow right into her field of vision. Buick was proving difficult to ignore. He spun wildly in the air, grabbed objects off the street to examine them, and yelled compliments at passing mares, even though he knew they couldn't hear him. Every time she started to tune him out, Spike's excited chatter would break her concentration. This was going to be a long day. By the time the three reached the police station, Twilight's nerves were nearly shot. Thankfully, the presence of more ponies served to calm both her companions down. Typically of Ponyvillians, Even at this early hour, a large group had already gathered outside, some to help out, but most just to see what was going on. Hidden somewhere inside the mass of ponies, the tiny police station was completely invisible. Buick soared overhead as they approached the crowd, chuckling to himself. Twilight tried to force her way to the front of the group, but was quickly cut off. "Back of the line, lady!" A large pony with a mustache snapped as she tried to push past him. "But I have a letter!" she protested, but the athletic colt had already turned away. She desperately scanned the crowd for a familiar face, smiling as her eyes landed on a certain grey Pegasus. "Ditsy-do!" Twilight cried. The male mare turned and grinned as she saw Twilight approach, her eyes rolling in opposite directions before they came into focus. "I have a letter for Colgate from Princess Celestia, but I can't get inside. Can you help?" Ditsy gave a lopsided salute. "Can do, Unicron," she said reverently. "You stay here, Muffin." For the first time, Twilight noticed a tiny filly by the male mare's side, grey with her mother's yellow mane, but sporting a horn instead of wings. Ditsy took the scroll from the waiting Spike and rose into the air. "Gangway!" she yelled, barreling through the air towards the door. Ponies scattered in all directions as she flew. Even ponies who hadn't met Ditsy-do had heard to get well out of her way when she had a letter to deliver. Twilight was left with the tiny grey unicorn, who stared up at her with a faint smile. "Hi, Dinky," Spike said warmly. "Hello, Spike." Twilight bit her lip. Mixed-race children weren't frowned upon exactly. They were just unusual. Even in a town as supposedly progressive as Ponyville, a unicorn foal with a Pegasus mother would always draw stares. Even now she could see a couple ponies in the crowd giving the girl sideways glances. Thankfully, Twilight's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden reappearance of a grey Pegasus. "Colgate wants to see you," Ditsy chirped, then immediately turned around and started clearing a path towards the door. With a minimum of gentle taps and less gentle shoves, the little group made their way inside. The interior of the police station was just as crowded as the outside. It was a tiny place, little more than a waiting area with 2 small cells and a single office at the back. Even that was suffering from underuse. Dust covered everything, and there were certainly rodents living under the floorboards. At the far end of the room, a pair of desks had been set up, behind which 2 volunteer officers were talking to potential recruits. The sound of ponies shoving and arguing filled the air. Flying overhead was none other than Rainbow Dash, who was trying with little success to direct traffic. "Hey! Eyes front, buddy! Lines this way! Keep moving, every pony! You two, cut that out! Oh, hey, Twilight!" The cyan Pegasus drifted down, narrowly dodging a startled pair of colts as she landed. "What's up?" "Just going to see Colgate," Twilight shouted over the din. "How about you? How long have you been here?" "Since this morning. I was the first one in the door. Fastest in Equestria, you know." Rainbow Dash flapped their wings proudly. "With me on the team, we'll have Kira behind bars in 10 minutes flat." "That's great, Dash." Shoot, Dash too? I thought she of all ponies would be on my side. Oh well. Ditsy-do began gesturing impatiently. "I need to go. See you soon." "Definitely." Rainbow Dash flew back up to the ceiling and resumed shouting orders. With the male mare's help, Twilight Sparkle managed to make it the rest of the way to Colgate's office. "I'm back in line," Ditsy-do said. "Getting," she added as an afterthought. "Coming, Muffin." "Coming, Mummy." The 2 grey ponies began working their way back through the crowd. Spike gave a lingering glance after them. "Cute kid," he said. "Shame about those eyes. And her voice." "Now, Spike," chided Twilight as she led herself into the office, "you have to learn to look past things like that. I'm sure she's a very clever pony beneath—" She stopped in surprise as she saw who sat behind the officer's desk, letting the door swing shut behind her. There, poring over a huge stack of papers and looking like she hadn't slept in days, was... Romana? "Twilight!" The blue unicorn ran up to Twilight and wrapped her in a hug of almost Pinkie Pie proportions. "It's so good to see you again. I mean, I've seen you around all over the